It is Christmas 2022, which means only one thing. We are almost at the end of the year, and as is customary, it is time to share what I feel have been the best games of the year. As always, these are my personal choices based entirely on what I've played this year, and there is plenty that I have yet to get round to playing. Still on my list? Return to Monkey Island, God of War Ragnarok, Bayonetta 3, and Sonic Frontiers are all among the games that I've yet to get round to, and likely will get into them over Christmas and New Year, I hope. I was originally going to do a list of 6 best games of the year, just like last year, but this has actually been a pretty good year for games, so I'm bumping it up to 10. So, without further ado, let's get things started as cleanly as possible. Power Wash Simulator does exactly one thing. You have a pressure washer, and you clean things. That's it. That's the game. It doesn't sound like much, and yet this is easily one of the most satisfying games of the year. Now, perhaps this isn't a surprise to anyone who's ever used a pressure washer and felt the joy of seeing a layer of dirt get cleanly scraped off a surface by an aggressive jet of water. So when Power Wash Simulator drops you into a world where everything is obscenely filthy and it's your job to fix it, it ends up being a supremely zen experience. Hey, stop that, I'm being entirely serious. If that's not enough, there's also a story here, somehow. One that starts with you setting up a thriving power wash business and cleaning up playgrounds, old vehicles and houses, before you eventually graduate onto, well, I don't want to spoil too much, but let's just say it goes to some extremely strange places, and you end up saving the world with your glorious cleaning skills. Power Wash Simulator is an absolute joy, basically. Norco is an indie point-and-click narrative adventure that got critics raving in spring this year, and since it was on Game Pass, I decided to check it out to see what the fuss was about. And my god, I don't think I've played an adventure game so dense in its writing. Norco is set in a near-future version of the Louisiana town of the same name, built around an oil refinery that employs but also chokes the life out of the local community. It's a world of cyborgs and cyberpunk aesthetics, but instead of a glowing vision of the future, it's a world that gained much in technology, while everything around it has decayed. It's a town full of working class people forced out of jobs, struggling to get by, and just trying to find a point to it all. The game hops around genres with occasional RPG elements including the odd turn-based battle and an exploratory top-down river section, but principally there's a lot of reading text and clicking on objects like a typical adventure game. But that text is so full of complex choices, haunting dialogue, and narration that expresses a persistent sense of melancholy over the state of the world. The story speaks to a struggle that exists within a lot of working people in our modern day society, deeply criticising those who created those problems in the first place. It also punctuates this with a degree of surreal Lynchian weirdness that just adds to the detachment from reality that its characters all seem to seek. It's the first of several games on this list that I classify as the sad robot genre that I found myself delving deep into this year. You'll see that as we go along. Norco isn't a game for everyone, but if you are in its audience, it will hook you in and refuse to let go. As the Aristocats once sang, everybody wants to be a cat. And this year, Annapurna Interactive published an indie title that let everyone do exactly that. From scratching up rugs to knocking over paint cans, and from tripping up characters by rubbing on their legs to curling up in strange places, Stray lets its players live out their feline dreams. What's surprising about Stray, however, is how much of its story feels human. While you're looking at the world through the eyes of a cat, the real story lies in a group of robots who become human in a post-apocalyptic world. It's a sci-fi story about the nature of humanity, what makes us what we are, and whether or not humanity has a chance to live on beyond its own destruction. It also shockingly hit me hard in its final act and left me with tears in my eyes. One of very few games to evoke an emotional reaction that visceral out of me. And yeah, that makes this the second Sad Robot game of the year, something that I just didn't expect when I first saw trailers for this game. Stray is fundamentally a simple game. The puzzles, the progression, and the exploration are bare bones, but done in a way that still feels enjoyable to explore this world at near ground level, as our cat protagonist stares into the lives of the people around him and engages wherever he feels it's appropriate to shuffle his way in. Stray is an adorable little game that maybe isn't to everyone's liking, but for the way it hit me emotionally and for the sheer joy it gave me simply getting to meow at everything in sight, I just had to include Stray in my games of the year. Hey look, it's another of the Sad Robot games. Told you the review of these. And this time, you are the sad robot in question. Citizen Sleeper is set on a space station called the Eye out in the far reaches of space, just on the edge of a galaxy under corporate control. You are a sleeper, an android imprinted with a copy of a human consciousness, built for work purposes, woken up on the station with no idea how you got there, but very aware that the corpos are coming to get you. The game is a point-and-click adventure that plays a lot like a board game. Different parts of the station allow you to perform different actions, most of which require a set of dice that you can assign to them in order to determine how successful you are. Other actions require items or money. Once you're out of dice, you rest to advance to the next cycle. To complicate matters, you have to manage your energy and your general condition to stay alive and functioning, and certain parts of the station can trigger automatic actions after a certain number of cycles. For instance, there are two sets of traders that will arrive at set intervals, and you will constantly see their clocks ticking down throughout the game, and they'll stay for roughly 3 turns before disappearing again. It's a really interesting game, mechanically, as every cycle is a web of resource management. Do you spend your dice on earning some cash to buy yourself a meal, or do you work towards favours for fellow station residents to stop the corporation from finding you? Do you spend your limited money on stabilizers to prevent your deliberately dying body from collapsing? Or do you use it to access new portions of the station and open up further objectives? These are questions you're constantly asking yourself, giving the game a surprising amount of strategy. But the story is superb and the real draw here. You find yourself desperately seeking work and acceptance, and in the process you get to know those who help you out, and they can become your friends. The vibe is very much one of misfits trying to find a place that they can carve out for themselves in the universe. It's about figuring out what it means to be human, and it's about finding your freedom. There is also some gorgeous character art in here too. I don't have much to say about it beyond that, but I really had to highlight it. It may not look much from this footage, but Citizen Sleeper is the kind of game that sucks you in with its mechanics and story, and the next thing you know, hours have gone by, and now you're invested in a fungus chef's life despite it being mostly text and a single drawing. It's impressive work. Okay, I think it's time to take a break from the sad robots. So the last time I engaged with anything in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise was when I was about 6 years old and the show was called Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles in the UK due to the terrible ninja wars of the 1990s. More on that in a future video. So it was perhaps a surprise that I jumped so quickly into Shredder's Revenge, but I did, driven by 2 factors. I'd had a fun time in a local arcade bar with some friends mere months before playing one of the OG arcade games, and also because Dotemu and Associates are doing a superb job lately bringing back the side-scrolling beat-em-ups of the 90s and making them even more enjoyable somehow. Also, it was on Game Pass, so that made my decision even easier as well. And it took me right back to being 6 years old, as the game is a throwback to that era, even down to hiring the original voice actors. And more importantly, it absolutely fits into the same brilliant niche that Streets of Rage 4 occupied 2 years ago, bringing an old-school genre triumphantly into the modern era. Every aspect of Shredder's Revenge is pure joy. Juggling enemies is a fun time, with moves fluidly flowing into one another, and every move landing with a satisfying chunky thud. Each of the playable characters feels different. Leonardo is Mr. Everyman, Donatello and Splinter have absurd range, Raphael hits hard, and Michelangelo and April are speedy and therefore the characters I had the most fun with. But it goes beyond that. Every single aspect surrounding this immensely fun gameplay was also superb. The pixel art is some of the best in the business, with beautiful animation to back it up. And my god, the soundtrack. T. Lopez's work on Sonic Mania already showed his expertise at crafting retro-style tunes that somehow sound like they're from the 90s and also from the present day at the same time, and he's done it again here too, even recruiting a few vocalists for some tracks, and also producing a glorious recreation of the cartoon's theme tune with Mike Patton on vocals. I feel like I'm the exact target audience for Shredder's Revenge, and it did everything it possibly could to make me fall in love with it. Okay, after that brief interlude, we're back to the sad robot genre, except this one goes in a vastly different direction with what that means. While the other games I've mentioned have asked questions about what it means to put a human consciousness in a robot or what it means to be a human in a world full of AI, Signalis decides to examine what happens if those questions break the mind of one of those AIs. This is more Sad Robot has a complete mental breakdown, I guess. Signalis is a horror game, one that definitely fits into the trend of horror titles that are fully embracing the classic PS1 aesthetic. So basically low poly models and gameplay styles from that era. And this game wears its inspirations on its sleeve constantly. One area where every door had the names of birds made me say, yeah okay Resident Evil, while a late game area full of horrendous flesh monstrosities owes more than a little debt to Silent Hill. And yet, despite these obvious influences, it manages to carve out an identity of its own. For one, it's got a sci-fi setting set in a far future where space exploration is handled by crews of gestalts, i.e. normal humans, and replicas, robots with human consciousness. You play as one of the replicas, Elster, as she sets out into an underground facility under an ice planet where only replicas remain, and most of those that are left have become twisted and murderous. The game plays like a top-down version of Resident Evil, all interconnected rooms full of weird keys and puzzles, and just like the games that inspired it, you can expect those puzzles to go to some strange places, like placing tarot cards using someone's dream diary, or pulling wall safe codes from decoded radio messages. Naturally, there's also inventory management and ammo conservation built into all of this, and it all evokes that same mixture of exploratory curiosity and dread that those PS1 classics also did. It also has a powerful aesthetic, with anime-style characters blending with a persistent CRT filter, a meticulous low-poly environment, and constant glitching to make something that demands your attention. The glitching isn't just a visual effect either, as plenty of scenes throw up text and symbols in a combination of English, German, and what appears to be Chinese, most of which flashes by quickly, and all of it cryptic as hell. They managed to make this visual effect become a storytelling device. It quickly impressed me, but then I discovered the whole game was made by two people, and I was floored. The attention to detail, the mysterious world building happening in the background, and the imagination in its puzzle design, it all feels significantly larger than what you'd expect from a team this small. Signalis is a brilliant indie horror game, and I would recommend it to any fans of the genre who haven't checked it out yet. Much has been said about Horizon's uncanny ability to launch within a week of an industry darling that dominates the conversation. Zero Dawn launched next to Breath of the Wild, the game that constantly topped Games of the Decade lists and has effectively defined the direction of the Zelda series going forward. And this year, Forbidden West had the misfortune of launching right next to Elden Ring, the much hyped FromSoft and George R.R. Martin game that took the Soulsborne formula into an open world. And much like 2017, I feel like the outlier who simply didn't care for the big hyped up game and took much more interest in Horizon instead. I've never played Breath of the Wild, and I played a decent chunk of Bloodborne, and while I deeply respect what it's doing, I simply don't feel like playing any more of it, or indeed any other FromSoft game. Just a personal preference. I'm aware that I'm an exception here. Anyway, yes, Horizon Forbidden West. I loved Zero Dawn due to its world of robot dinosaurs and tribal politics, and what Forbidden West has done is taken all that was good about Zero Dawn and just done more of it. And in many ways it's done it better. First of all, we need to talk about the map. it was already great in Zero Dawn, but in Forbidden West they've managed to do the impossible. They've increased the map size without simply making half of it a barren, empty wasteland with nothing in it, a problem that many open worlds have. Every inch of this map has something interesting in it, from the satellite array that makes up one tribe's capital to the redwood forests along the west coast. And not to spoil anything, but the ruins of Las Vegas were a magical experience that were worth the journey it took to get there. The world building here builds significantly on its predecessor too. While my focus while playing the first game was on uncovering the past, Forbidden West embedded me deeply into the present. I cared much more deeply about the tribal politics this time, and seeing how the technology of the old world influenced the tribes of the new was just fascinating. Seeing them worship the robot dinosaurs or worshipping an old museum was a really interesting exploration of how our world could be viewed in thousands of years' time. Guerrilla also made other changes too. Combat mechanics feel refined with more options to play around with, making battles both more enjoyable and more challenging. But fundamentally, it isn't much different to what came before it, but it was built on an already solid foundation, so that's fine. Basically, Horizon Forbidden West is a confident, iterative sequel that deserves to be thought of as more than just the game in Elden Ring's shadow. I loved A Plague Tale: Innocence, a game made on a limited budget yet reaching for greatness on the level of The Last of Us, and it somehow managed to achieve it. From its interesting and unique premise, well-developed stealth mechanics, and a metric crap ton of terrifying rats, A Plague Tale was a brilliant game that caught many by surprise. And this year, Asobo Studio only bloody did it again. A Plague Tale: Requiem is, much like Horizon Forbidden West, a sequel that does a lot of what made the first game great, while improving on everything it didn't do so well. While the first game was largely about the bonds between siblings, particularly during harrowing times, Requiem decides to go big on following that up, examining what happens to children who go through experiences like that. I intend to go into this in more detail in a future video, but A Plague Tale: Requiem has a constant undercurrent of PTSD running through it, but naturally unnamed because this is set in old times before they'd invented it. Our protagonist, Amicia, is deeply changed from her experiences, and it leads her to act irrationally and occasionally dangerously, a far cry from the more hesitant girl in the first game. Her brother Hugo, too, spends much of the game scared and upset about the cruel injustices of the world, and why he had to be cursed with the rat plague. Both of these portrayals are backed with incredible performances by the two leads, who are both young actors with little experience under their belts. They were great in the first game, but here they are again, just giving it their all. If these two don't go on to prosperous careers, I will be utterly baffled at the waste of that talent. But it's not just them, as they've been paired with some additional characters that are just so likeable. Maybe it's the affable British performances, but I clicked with both Arno and Sophia as additional companions almost instantly, and I loved all the time that we spent with them in the game. But what about the gameplay, I hear you cry? Well, I'm happy to report that they've improved on that too. One problem with Innocence was that a lot of it felt on rails and intensely linear with specific solutions to specific challenges. That was fine, but they have improved it here. While Requiem is still generally linear, the stealth and combat sections take place in much more open areas, while Amicia is given extra tools to sneak and distract her way around enemies. Being able to throw tar into people's faces or create makeshift medieval hand grenades are fun tools, and I'm glad that they're here. Amicia also occasionally gets a crossbow too, and it's so satisfying to finally just shoot bolts into your foes after spending hours trying to line up sling throws. And my god, this game is beautiful. The setting has shifted, placing the siblings closer to the south coast of France, and this Mediterranean vibe shines through. There's a sequence in the middle of the game where you can explore a Spanish island full of flowers and sunny fields, and I just had to stop and take it all in because it was so gorgeous. And these moments of beauty are also used as a brilliant contrast to the game's inherent darkness at the heart of it all. It balances the light and the dark expertly, meaning that when tragedy hits, it hits hard. A Plague Tale: Requiem is a deeply affecting game, and an astounding improvement on its already excellent predecessor. Clearly I'm all about iterative sequels this year, because here's another one. Splatoon has been my online multiplayer game of choice since the first game on the Wii U. It's got rad vibes and quirky characters that make it feel genuine fun and tend to keep the toxic gamers away to make it a genuinely pleasant experience. And now they're on a third one, and no, it's not a massive revolution, but it absolutely does not need to be. Splatoon is still an incredibly fun experience, and now that experience is even better. Getting into matches no longer feels as much of a chore, as you're no longer held in a static menu. Now there's a full lobby where players can hang out between matches, meaning you can test out your weapons, or simply gather with other players to squid party the time away. Matches are still as fun as ever, now with some added challenge, as maps are now encouraging more direct contact with your opponents. It has made matches feel a lot more tense at times, although there are definitely balance issues with some weapons, because of course there always is. I've also started to get into the competitive modes a little more this time, because it just feels so good to play that I've been hooked to the game so much. So playing those modes gives it a bit more variety. Speaking of variety, I've also been playing a lot more Salmon Run, the Horde mode that I barely touched in Splatoon 2 because it required you to play at highly specific times of day that never aligned with when I actually wanted to play the game. Now it's available all the time, so I'm actually playing it, and it's a lot of fun, even if there are plenty of times where I do absolutely terribly at it. I haven't even touched on the single player campaign yet either, which has also seen some significant changes from previous entries. Instead of the fairly mundane levels of previous games, Splatoon 3 goes hard into the challenge setup of Splatoon 2's Octo Expansion DLC, and also hands you a little buddy to assist you. Making the idols the bosses was a genius move too. Also, speaking of the idols, Splatoon 3 has Big Man, who is shaped like a friend. This is why it's the superior Splatoon. Splatoon 3 has been a glorious time, and it's good to get more out of one of Nintendo's weirder franchises. And it seems that Japan agreed with my enthusiasm, but it's not quite my game of the year. Okay, so honestly, I had a hard time deciding on my ultimate game of the year this year. At any given time in the past couple of months, the last 5 games in this list have occupied this spot. Each of those games excelled at something. Splatoon and TMNT excelled in mechanics that just feel good to play. Horizon nailed exploration. A Plague Tale had a superb story. Signalis nailed aesthetics and atmosphere. Even Stray stood a chance of getting here simply because of how it made me feel to play it. But then I kept realizing that there was only one game this year that excelled at several of these things at once. And that game is Tunic. Tunic is clearly inspired by the 2D Zelda titles, albeit deciding to shift the perspective slightly to an isometric view. You play as a small unnamed fox who finds themselves on a mysterious island, face to face with a strange spirit who seemingly needs their help. The only solution? Find a sword and go battling through the island in search of a way to help. Tunic appears simplistic, a retro throwback that simply asks you to hit stuff with a sword, get some treasure, and solve some dungeons. But Tunic is so much more than this. For a start, in a year where much debate has been had about how much games like God of War hold players' hands through puzzle sections, Tunic went the complete opposite way. It dumps you in its world and says, go on, figure it out. You have to actively engage with the world to figure things out here, and it offers just enough breadcrumbs. It manages to avoid being frustrating, while still letting the player figure things out themselves. There's a sense of mystery and confusion running through Tunic, but in a way that encourages curiosity. Signs and other forms of writing in the world are entirely in a fictional language, giving the game the vibe of muddling your way through an imported Japanese game in the 90s. Tunic wants you to pay attention and keep track of what you're doing. Further to this, the game's manual exists entirely within the game, but you also have to piece it together gradually by finding the pages in the world. Initially, you find a page that offers you basic controls, but later you can get clues about dodging, stamina, sprinting, and other mechanics. All of these mechanics are tools you have access to right at the start of the game, but Tunic deliberately hides them from you until you either find the appropriate manual page, or somehow figure it out yourself. This sense of secrets hidden in plain sight also extends to parts of the world that feel inaccessible, but hide secret shortcuts that are open to you right at the start. The amount of times that I looped around to a previous location and went, wait, I could go here the whole time, was an absurd amount. And each time I was genuinely delighted at how sneaky the game was at doing that. But again, the manual is the real stroke of genius here. Each page you find not only shows you game mechanics, but it offers puzzle hints, maps, and sometimes even secrets of its own. The manual even shows signs of the game being previously played by someone else, with notes scrawled in the margins of the booklet in a fading ballpoint pen. It's a cute detail that adds so much character to this fake manual that I always love seeing what notes this unseen player had added elsewhere. And the big secret of this manual was the thing that really impressed me. In these days where every gaming device has some form of screenshot function, I want more games to make use of that, because the few games that do always delight me. Signalis encouraged it occasionally, but Tunic goes hard on it. It makes use of it in a way that required me to put the game down and piece together screenshots from the manual outside the game. It was a surprisingly tactile way to solve one of the game's major puzzles, and I really wish that games did more off-the-wall stuff like this. But secrets aside, Tunic is just a joy to play. Moving the little fox buddy around is always a fun time, with responsive combat mechanics and a tough but fair level of challenge. Visually, the game has a beautiful minimalism that gives it a striking look, while signposting the player in subtle ways. And the score is lo-fi beats to kill monsters to, that I'm now hearing hides secret messages of its own? What? God damn it, this game is something else. So there you have it. Tunic is my game of the year for 2022. But any game in this video was an absolute triumph. And ultimately, I think the real winner this year was all of us for getting so many brilliant experiences. And so we come to the end of the year. As this goes live, we're about to head into Christmas. So, Merry Christmas to all of you. And since we're at that point of the year, I hope you don't mind if I take this time to just thank all of you for sticking around and watching. This year has seen a decent amount of growth for the channel. It's the best year since I relaunched in 2020, in fact. And as a result, I'm really excited for 2023. I've put out fewer videos this year, but a big part of this was that my ideas are getting bigger and more exciting, and it honestly took me a little bit by surprise, and I was wildly disorganized. But in the new year, my intention is to get on top of this and get more of these ideas out there more often. I honestly cannot wait to realise some of the ideas that I have floating around in my head. It's going to be fun. But finally, the big success story for the channel this year was the Final Fantasy X-2 video. It's a video that I've wanted to do for a while, so it feels good to have that out in the wild, and also to have it performing so well. It makes it even better. Thank you to everyone who watched any of my videos, but mostly that one, especially just for the huge success it's been. And especially a big welcome to the many people who discovered the channel through that video and subscribed as a result. And of course, thank you to my patrons who help fund the channel. It's not a lot of money right now, but it is appreciated. And if you would like to join those patrons, there is a link to Patreon in the description. But that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed my look back at my favourite games from this year, and I'd really love to hear your picks for this year down in the comments too. And I will leave you to that, and I will see you again in 2023.